Welcome to Crossroads. The Chinese regime has been using the International Criminal Police Organization, that's Interpol, as a tool for transnational repression. Folks, we fund Interpol. We're one of the biggest funders of it. The CCP is using the thing we're funding as its own person. Look, in a recent case, Alibaba co-founder Jack Ma, he has been implicated in a CCP campaign to export its abuses into other countries. One example of many. But look, this is just the latest where the organization of 196 member countries, the U.S. is one of the biggest funders, has been manipulated by the communist regime in China to work as its own police force. Now look, first off, this is what happened with Jack Ma. Guardian says this. It says the Chinese regime enlisted Jack Ma, the billionaire co-founder of Alibaba, in an intimidation campaign to press a businessman to help in the purge of a top official. Documents seen by the Guardian suggest, they say. It says the businessman, who can be named only as H for fear of reprisals against his family still in China, faced a series of threats from the Chinese state in an attempt to get him to return home from France, where he was living. It says they included a barrage of phone calls, the arrest of his sister, and the issuing of a red notice, that's an international alert, through Interpol. They used Interpol. Now it says this as well. The climax in April 2021 was the call from Ma. It says, quote, "They said, I'm the only one who can persuade you to return," he said. And notes that H, who had known Ma for many years, recorded the call. He had done the same for calls he had received from other friends, as well as Chinese security officials who had called in the weeks before, all with the same message. Interesting. Now, I know people personally who've also gotten calls like that. The CCP will try to intimidate them, try to use their family members to pressure them. This is one of the ways they do it. Now, it says the individual who was targeted, referred to again just as H in the reports, he's a Singapore citizen. He was born in China. But when this whole thing went down with Jack Ma, he was arrested in France, effectively under an order from the Chinese Communist Party. Basically, here's what happened. Chinese Communist Party police issued a warrant for his arrest. They were charging him for financial crime, quote unquote. They do that all the time. And it says they wanted to, extradite the man to China. The regime went through Interpol as a way of doing that. They put out a red notice on the International Criminal Alert System. And since France is part of that whole international agreement, which we finance, by the way, French authorities then took the man's passport and had to decide whether to extradite him. But another interesting thing with this story, it says that according to a transcript of a phone call, Jack Ma suggested to the man H that all this could go away. All this pressure, all the threats against his family, all the problem of being extradited to China, probably tortured and killed. They do torture you, then kill you. If he helped in the prosecution of a Chinese politician. That individual was Sun Li-jun. And basically the CCP was targeting him, which we'll get into in a minute. For that politician, the Chinese Communist Party was alleging that he took bribes and manipulated the stock market. Ma told H, quote, "They are doing all of this for Sun, not for you." And it should be noted that under the Chinese Communist Party, just because someone gets accused of a crime does not mean they actually did it. In fact, I'd say usually they did not do it, especially with international stuff. The Chinese Communist Party very often fabricates charges because, doing so lets them manipulate the international legal system. If they tell Interpol, hey, we want to purge this official, go and arrest this guy, Interpol is not going to be able to follow the order because it has to go through the local police of the country. French police, they're probably not going to help to extradite like a religious believer or like a democracy activist, right? But if you tell them it's financial crime, then they'll do it. And so they use that. This also helps the CCP give the illusion of justice, right? This was not a purge of a political enemy. This was the arrest of a high-profile criminal. Now, the deeper context was that Sun Li-jun was the deputy security minister in charge of security in Hong Kong during the 2017 protests. That was when the Chinese Communist Party brought a brutal end to Hong Kong's, relatively democratic system, and also faced mass protests, which it then disappeared many of the protesters. Now, here's more on that story on how Interpol is used by the CCP, though. The Guardian says this. It says the Chinese government issued a red notice for H through Interpol. Again, H being the pseudonym letter given to that individual. It says the international police watchdog. This flagged him as a potential criminal to police forces all around the world and meant he was unable to travel. And it said, quote, "It is like a pin through a butterfly," said Ted R. Brumond, an expert witness in legal cases involving Interpol procedures. And he adds, quote, "It holds someone down, locks them in place so they can't get away." The way this works is this. It says, while red notices, again through Interpol, are used against serious criminals, campaigners have long warned they can be abused, and they very often are, by the way. It says the British lawyer Rhys Davies recently told a government inquiry into transnational repression that red notices were, quote, routinely used and abused by autocratic regimes to target dissidents and opponents overseas. He called the system, quote, the sniper rifle of autocrats because it is long distance, targeted, and very effective. While other countries, including Russia, Turkey, and Rwanda, have also been known to abuse the system, China's tactics are different, according to experts. Instead of relying on extraditions, the Chinese authorities use Interpol to locate people, and then they ramp up the pressure, threatening them and their family members back home until the individual agrees to return, quote-unquote, voluntarily. Because they can't necessarily extradite them, the CCP holds them in place and then attacks them with their agents. Now, notes a spokesperson for Interpol said the system meant thousands of the world's most serious criminals were arrested every year. How many of those are actually innocent people being targeted by autocratic regimes? We may never know. And look, these campaigns from the CCP, they tie into a few other things. One program is called Operation Fox Hunt. Now, that was when the CCP was using its special agents. This includes mostly agents through its Ministry of State Security, kind of like the Chinese, CIA effectively. And they were targeting dissidents all around the world, even right here in the United States. Even more shockingly, I should add, they were relatively allowed to do it. A lot of this took place during the Obama administration. They cooperated with the Chinese Communist Party on Operation Fox Hunt. They actually still do it to an extent. But again, this is under the allegation that these are criminals, but we don't really know if that's the case with a lot of them. In just one of the recent cases on this, a former NYPD officer just got sentenced to prison for 18 months for helping Chinese operatives track down one of their political targets in New Jersey. And there have actually been a lot of other ones like this. The Trump administration currently, as we speak, has been going after a lot of agents with Operation Fox Hunt. They actually have been arresting a lot of them just over the last couple months, actually, including in New York, including elsewhere. But sometimes the Chinese Communist Party's agents will also threaten their targets. Sometimes they'll try to arrest or extradite them. Other times they'll threaten their family members. They'll even try to pressure them to commit suicide, saying, you know what, all this can end. It can be on your own terms. But there are even cases where Chinese Communist Party operatives will physically harm their targets, even in other countries. That includes murder, that includes physical beatings, that includes other things. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he actually recently announced the United States has imposed sanctions on some Chinese figures who were targeting Hong Kong. And Rubio noted the CCP operatives were, quote, involved in acts of transnational repression targeting activists on U.S. soil. Now look, there was also the issue of the secret Chinese police stations, even in the United States. Even right here in New York City, there were Chinese secret police stations. And another recent investigation, Daily Caller did a fantastic job digging it up, found the Chinese Communist Party has set up what it calls a shadow justice system in the United States. So there were secret police stations in the United States. There's a shadow justice system in the United States. There are Chinese special agents in the United States. There are Interpol issues and so on, working on extraditions in cooperation with some authorities. And all of this is happening not in China, but all around the world, folks. Now, it notes that in the United States with these shadow justice systems, Daily Caller says it involves unsanctioned courtrooms in the U.S. And these are operating in California, they're operating in Washington, D.C., in Hawaii, and New York. You get that? The investigation says that, quote, although the Chinese government claims it appoints law enforcement officials overseas in order to more conveniently handle mundane matters like Chinese driver's license renewal and international divorce cases, U.S. lawmakers and intelligence analysts say China's underground courts could easily be weaponized to punish dissidents and expand communist influence abroad. I can tell you, as someone who has researched this for going on close to 20 years now, that is exactly what they do. In fact, I've been exposed since 2008. Now, back to what's happening through how the CCP is using Interpol, though, right, as part of these whole programs. Alibaba co-founder Jack Ma, he used to be one of like the billionaire poster boys of the Chinese Communist Party's tech industry. You've probably seen him, right? That he's like the, the Steve Jobs of China. In reality, he just mostly copied like U.S. tech. But aside from that point, he built some of the biggest companies in China, tech platforms. He'd had Ant Group, Alibaba, and so on. Back in 2021, when this whole thing went down, there was a lot of other things going on. So 2021 was when this whole alleged, collaboration with Interpol took place. But at that same time, Jack Ma himself was under attack. The Chinese Communist Party blocked his Ant Group IPO. That was going to be the biggest thing on the stock market, right? One of the biggest. Now, there always tend to be like surface narratives. This one didn't fly by anybody. It was pretty clear the Chinese regime was targeting Jack Ma because he criticized one of CCP leader Xi Jinping's campaigns for what they called financial oversight. In China, that just means the Communist Party is gaining more control over the businesses. That's all it actually meant. But it was also reported at the time that the regime was concerned about the power that Jack Ma could get if he were to be running what is effectively the largest IPO in the entire world. Because what happens if you have one guy running that whole thing, and that's a big chunk of the Chinese economy, and he gets arrested? Well, the stock market's going to collapse. And you can't do that normally. You don't want to do it. But the CCP did it anyway. Now, it wasn't long after all that went down that the expected happened. 2022, speculation was spreading that Jack Ma was arrested by the Chinese Communist Party. This was 1 year after his IPO was blocked, 1 year after the whole thing with Interpol. When he was arrested, it caused a $26 billion market crash of Alibaba's stock. The CCP deemed it important enough to disappear him. Now, the Chinese man called Ma was detained in the city where Alibaba is based. We don't know much about it. The news wiped $26 billion off the stock market. CCP official mouthpieces reported that this person, Ma, as in Jack Ma, we suspect, was arrested under suspicion of, quote, colluding with overseas anti-China hostile forces to, quote, incite secession and, quote, incite subversion of state power. What does that actually mean? If you're inciting secession or inciting subversion of state power, that's CCP speak for saying maybe you criticized the Chinese Communist Party. It could be that you support democracy. An important piece with all of this is that Jack Ma's business and a lot of this all went down in Hong Kong. Hong Kong was kind of like the trade zone of China until they ended its democracy effectively. And so, of course, democracy being one of the biggest issues in Hong Kong, now brought to a brutal end by the CCP. If you supported the democracy movements, they would call you a secessionist, and they would say you're trying to subvert the state. Now, look, Chinese state media rushed to assert that it was not Jack Ma, this individual Ma that was arrested at the same time that Jack Ma disappeared. And that they only said that after Alibaba's stocks dropped, and after they announced it wasn't Jack Ma, the stocks rebounded. So it's not clear if that was them trying to get investors back, or if they were telling the truth, right? But something else happened. Jack Ma was effectively disappeared by the CCP, no matter how you look at it. The regime took over Alibaba. Oh yeah, we didn't disappear him. but he's gone and the Communist Party is taking over his business. Just put your money back into China, international investors. Believe us, right? That's basically what happened. That also included the news outlet, by the way, South China Morning Post, which anybody who reads China news, you'll know South China Morning Post used to be somewhat reliable. They've become more of a CCP mouthpiece. Part of the reason is Alibaba acquired South China Morning Post when Jack Ma was disappeared. That went under CCP control right along with Alibaba. That's what happened. And look, to top it all off, the Chinese Communist Party also fined Jack Ma's ant group about $1 billion. So nothing to see here. By the way, we're taking over his business and we're disappearing him. You know what this reminds me of? Have any of you seen the video from that African country when there was like a military coup, and then like people are watching cable TV, and suddenly the newscaster's gone, and there's a African general sitting in front of the news camera, and he declares that there has not been a military coup. It's a little bit like that. Now look, the new reports that are coming out now, though, that the CCP was using Jack Ma to try to target and arrest other officials, it is interesting because look, this ties into something else, not even just about Jack Ma. This is much bigger than that. This ties into the whole CCP network of infighting, of political purges, and most importantly here, of transnational repression. The Chinese Communist Party extending its police and law into other countries. Let that sink in. The Chinese Communist Party is running a system of law in the United States, not based on US law, but based on CCP law. People can be arrested, people can be extradited, people can be disappeared. That is happening on American soil. Now look, it's not even just the US either. This is all around the world they're doing this. And this is also why the issue with Interpol is even more serious. If the CCP is using Interpol as part of that, because we fund Interpol. We're the biggest funder, by the way. Now, it's been known for a long time the Chinese Communist Party uses Interpol as part of its whole programs for international repression. This is known. This even includes issues about the CCP has gotten key figures into leadership positions in Interpol. They use it, and they also, to an extent, control it. The Guardian was warning about this back in 2021, interestingly. It said at the time, a senior official at China's Ministry of Public Security. The MPS, this is different than in the Ministry of State Security, which is, again, Operation Fox Hunt. Ministry of Public Security is the Chinese policing organization that runs the secret Chinese police stations. That's the one that does this. The Ministry of Public Security is also the organization the CCP is using to do these international collaboration programs, training police in other countries. They're doing this in all the countries surrounding Australia. They're doing it all around Africa. They're even doing it in parts of Europe. They're subverting the police of other countries. That is the MPS. And that is also one of the main leadership heads they tried getting to control Interpol. 2021, folks. A senior official at China's Ministry of Public Security is seeking election to Interpol's executive committee, prompting concerns from human rights activists and international politicians that China could misuse the global criminal police organization's capabilities to track down overseas dissidents. They achieved that actually even prior to this. In fact, when the CCP did have one of its individuals in a leadership position there, the Chinese Communist Party even went after the person for not enforcing the CCP's interests through the use of the organization, just emphasizing what the CCP had done prior. Now notice this, though. Hu Bin-chen, the Deputy Director General of the Ministry's International Cooperation Department, the MPS, is one of 3 candidates vying for its 2 seats as Asia delegates on the committee. It says the 13-member executive committee oversees the work of Interpol's General Secretariat and helps set future policy, like the policies of the CCP, maybe. Now, note that Interpol controls a number of databases containing identifying details of people and property, which assist in global policing. And this is important because even aside from transnational repression, even aside from pinning a person down and then targeting them with special agents, even outside of that, if the CCP can get someone into Interpol, get one of its own officials leading the organization, it means they can also get access to those databases, details of all the people and all the property around the world. And it also operates a system of red notes, which are requests to locate and provisionally arrest an individual pending extradition. Pin them down, right? And they say, however, there are long-running concerns, you don't say, over governments or authorities misusing the system to track down dissidents. And now look, in another recent report, well, not recent, this is another one at the time, it noted that it once used in the hunt for fugitive criminals, the global police agency's most wanted red notice list now includes political refugees and dissidents. So this was all known. This was known, this was understood, it was allowed to happen. America did not pull its funding out of Interpol while this was happening. Interpol has continued to operate. America continues to fund it. And it was known. The CCP and other autocratic regimes do this. Now look, many human rights organizations, they've been warning about this for years. Freedom House, for example, they noted in 2021 that the Chinese Communist Party uses Interpol as a key piece of its Operation Fox Hunt campaign. 2021 Freedom House, here's what they said, quote, the campaign was announced alongside the dissemination of a list of 100 individuals China said were sought through Interpol red notices. Like other countries, China uses Interpol notices to imply international endorsements of its pursuit, even though Interpol notices are not subject to any judicial review. An extrajudicial global police force. Now it says as well, quote, despite its cultivation of an image of legality and careful references to international law, at its core, the CCP's anti-corruption campaign reflects its domestic context, in which the preferences of the party state stand above all other considerations. It is useful to recall the case of Meng Hongwei, a prominent CCP official from the domestic security apparatus. Meng served as president of Interpol from 2016 until October 2018. This is important because the CCP had one of its key officials leading Interpol as the actual president before the 2021 issue of them trying to get one of their MPS agents in. This was the individual the CCP was pressuring, saying, hey, we want you to use Interpol more in line with the Chinese Communist Party's interests. That was Meng, the president of Interpol, right? And it says this, when he was abruptly arrested in China, expelled from the party, and sentenced to prison for corruption. Why did that happen? The CCP was accusing him of not doing enough to use Interpol for Communist Party interests. That's why that happened. It notes as well, quote, this sequence of events should act as a reminder of how the CCP's global anti-corruption drive is part and parcel of its overall strategy of shaping international norms to its advantage. They call it the borrowed boat strategy, by the way. What does that mean? I need a boat. I don't have a boat, but you have a boat. I'm going to borrow your boat. The CCP wants to have international policing. They don't have international policing, so what do? They borrow the system of international policing. They call that the borrowed boat strategy. That's what they're doing. Now, it's not just Freedom House. There's a lot of organizations that warned about this. Heritage Foundation, another of many examples. They were warning about the CCP's use of Interpol as part of programs to export Communist Party law into other countries. They've been warning about it for years. 2022, they said this, contrary to Hollywood, Interpol is not an international police force. It's more like a bulletin board on which police forces around the world post their wanted notices. But Interpol does have problems, and China is among the biggest. And it added, quote, even worse is China's abuse of the system. Russian abuse of Interpol is a blunt instrument. China's is a full court press. The Chinese government does not just invent crimes. It threatens families to to force its victims back to China. They say, nor is it just dissidents who are targeted. American entrepreneurs, American citizens, American entrepreneurs, it says, who have property that regimes want to steal and contracts those regimes need to violate in the process are also vulnerable. So, if you're a business person and the CCP wants what you have, they might fabricate charges against you and use Interpol to target you. There are cases where this has happened. The Heritage Foundation notes this. They say that even Americans have in fact been targeted through Interpol when they travel abroad. You go to another country, the CCP uses Interpol for a red notice, you get held by authorities, and then the Communist Party comes after you. American citizens, through an organization American taxpayers are funding. Heritage Foundation noted the CCP's use of Interpol could raise some issues with the facts that the United States, again, pays a good chunk of Interpol's bills. We pay a huge chunk of it, by the way. And we seem to do that with a lot of global organizations. It seems to be a trend here, right? And these problems have not gotten any better. A recent report, right, I showed you 2021 until now, a recent report from Red Notice Monitor, a website that monitors, again, Interpol stuff, notes that while the United States is still one of the main funders of Interpol, the organization continues to be used by the Chinese Communist Party. It notes this, quote, "The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, has weaponized international law enforcement mechanisms, particularly Interpol, to target political dissidents, human rights defenders, and critics of its regime." Like myself, by the way. And it adds that the United States seems to monitor this. It states, quote, "The misuse of Interpol red notices is monitored in part by the U.S. TRAP Act reports on transnational repression and are highlighted in the U.S. State Department reports on human rights. China's manipulation of Interpol's red notice system is unparalleled and has outpaced even Russia in scale and sophistication." I don't know, maybe some authorities think it's a necessary evil because we continue to fund it, but it is known they do this. The U.S. even tracks it. The U.S. is aware. As always, folks, please don't forget to give this video a like. It helps us a lot in the algorithm, especially on like YouTube. Be sure to leave a comment. That also helps us, by the way. That said, as always, folks, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, stay free. Thank you.